Okay. So I've clicked recording. That's it. Okay, so now I'm recording. Okay, so the first question is, could you tell me a bit about your group or project?
Yes, I have two different sort of groups, in the sense that when I funded seminar, a textile research seminar, it was basically university based. So it started a meeting in the university with students from the master's degree in science, political science, and social sciences, and they were keen to have a sewing group, and I proposed that we arranged a critical sewing group, basically. So as a group that we would discuss readings and sewing at the same time. And this quickly changed into something where we started, or I, because they moved out of the group and they graduated and whatnot, but I formed another group with colleagues who are interested in studying the relationship between making and thinking and safe spaces and feminist pedagogy and all these things that are woven around textiles and women. And slowly that was growing and went growing, and then I managed to get the Museum of Modern Art interested in putting an exhibit on a project that was done by this collective called Artesanal Tecnológica, and they had this project that was give me a second, hold on a second. Um, this their project was Costurera Memoria, and what the project was basically I don't know how to call costurero. Costurero is the sewing group, basically the
Like sewing
women
box, is it?
yeah, it's a sewing box, exactly. A sewing box, but that in Spanish or in Colombia means a sewing gathering. So women gather to sew together periodically, and
That
they
also
were
means sewing group.
a sewing group, yes, but costurero is also a sewing box. So it's the same. It's the same word used for both. So it's quite nice because it's the image
Yeah.
is the sewing box, but at the same time is a sewing group. Anyway, the project was that this sewing box literally was traveling from different places in Colombia, arriving to sewing groups that would create a piece that would talk about conflict and the peace process. So I thought it was very pertinent to bring that exhibit to Cali, and I brought the exhibit. The museum and I got together to bring the exhibit. And in the during while the exhibit was here, I started putting together some workshops and some reading groups and sewing groups together, and that went very well. So from that point on, I've been having two different groups. A meeting group in the university in which we read sort of academic papers and we read works on touch, feeling, um, feminist pedagogy, textiles, and I have a a sewing group at the museum in which we sometimes cross projects. So, for example, last year I was interested in exploring the idea of domesticity and the feminine. And so what I did was I selected a lot of literature that sort of brought that image of the women in the house or the household or motherhood, and we read out loud and we talked while we embroidered, and the result was before doing this we did a series of workshops with the women in the sewing group, discussing, for example, what the house meant for them, what textiles meant for them, or what textiles they used to decorate the house, and sort of little projects that would sort of make way towards this discussion. And in the end, what we ended up doing, collectively decided to do, was a big sort of a mantelpiece in which we embroidered our names to begin with. And then we embroidered all the names of the women that we read out loud in the space. And then everybody embroidered all the names of the women they have read in their lives and all the names of the women who are important to them in their lives. So it's just basically this whole huge
Lovely.
mantelpiece that has a lot of names of women who've actually, who are in our lives. And so, it is for me, it's just one group, but in reality, there are two groups. And I've been struggling with the idea, and I think it's important to mention this because I've been struggling with how to not separate them, how to not think that there's one side that's academic and there's one side that's practice based. Because obviously in the sewing group at the museum, there are women who don't have don't have college degrees. They're just sewers, but doesn't mean that they're unable to read academic text. But at the same time, it's just how to exchange. Um, I find it easier to exchange knowledge that is practice based to the academic world than different. And
Yeah.
it's a challenge that I faced, and I'm constantly thinking about how to get over that sort of barrier that I've had. But yeah, that's sort of what the
That's
projects
so
that I've been engaging
interesting.
on.
Yeah, so lovely. And do they have different names, the two projects, or do they not really have names?
No, they actually have the same name. The textile seminar is called Seminario Textil El Costurero, but I refer to the textile seminar as the academic group, and to the costurero to the practice-based group.
Okay.
And not all the women in the textile seminar participate in the sewing group. For example, at the moment there are six of us, and only four of us participate in the sewing group. Two of us don't. They're not interested in sewing. They're there because currently we have a project that is exploring. Want to do an intervention in the city, and so they are in charge of sort of bringing to the discussion. But I'm particularly interested in, it's not really the city, it's an a public space. We want to explore, how women or how sexual diversities are challenged by the public space. And given that that COVID-19 sent us all home, and there is not really a public space anymore as such, we are thinking that we have to think about the new public space that is formed in the web,
Mm.
and we have to talk about the challenges of inhabiting those spaces. So these two researchers are basically doing research, and they're reading, and they bring into the discussion sort of that element of the research, while we are trying to figure out, how to connect what they're bringing with our own interests of sewing and producing. So they're not really part of the sewing group, um, but again, it's a challenge that I've had, is how to bring them to sewing and how to bring the women who are in the sewing group to academic discussions. No,
Yeah.
it's always like, I want to to sort of sew that gap that seems
Yeah.
to be, which is sort of a gap between the brain and the mind. No, it's a gap that is it's been there for years, for centuries.
Yeah. So beautiful, the idea of trying to bring them together.
Yeah.
And so the next question, I mean, you've kind of covered this, but these are set questions. Why are you running this project or these projects?
Why am I running them? When I was when I was a child, I was brought up by my aunt, who lived with us, and she was older than my mother for 20 years, so she was like a grandmother figure. I didn't have a grandmother. Um, they had both passed away when I was born, and so she was like a grandmother to me. She took care of us, and she cooked with us, and she taught me how to knit. And I was always interested in knitting, but I was always ashamed of being a knitter. embarrassed because it wasn't cool enough, because it was an old women's thing, or because it was weird. And then when I became a scholar, I thought that it wasn't a subject worthy of studying. And then I had two daughters, and I had to start thinking. I took feminism more seriously, and because I had to educate these two girls, and then I realized that the reason what I was considering, that knitting and textile practices were not really worthy of academic discussions, were the same reasons why women were oppressed. I decided that it was urgent that I addressed these issues, and I turned all my energies into studying about feminism, and basically dedicating myself to textile practices. Also because I think academic life values certain types of products, basically articles published in recognized journals, books and traditional forms of knowledge that leave behind other forms of knowledge, that have been forms of knowledge for the past centuries, but we just don't consider them. And so I've always kind of rebelled against this idea that there's only one form of knowledge, that is a paper based, published in a Q1 magazine that nobody will read, or that very few will read, or that many might read, but it's not the only form of knowledge. And also, I think, this whole idea that you have to have a certain amount of articles published to be a worthy scholar, or and those articles have to at the same time have citations from the same journal you're publishing in, seems to me a bit obscene form of academia. As a bit, it's like
Mm.
academia has surrendered to capitalism in a way,
Mm.
and I don't think that is academic life. I think that we should be open to many other forms of knowledge. And so I've tried to do that as well, because I think that is also a patriarchal structure,
Mm.
that form of academia that in which we live in is also very formed by a patriarchal structure that we need to um, question.
Yeah.
So that's that's what brought me to these topics.
And what are the aims? Or, I mean, does the project have goals? What are the goals of the project?
Well, every year we set on different explorations. So the first project we had, because we had the exhibit in Cali that was very close, that basically the exhibit was exploring um, the conflict and memory, and we were in the middle of the peace process, the peace signing process. Um, we were we all the workshops we had, all the products that came out of that year were based on violence and politics and memory and conflict in Colombia. The next year, we worked very closely with the Center for Afro Diasporic Studies, and all the pieces that came out of that year of work were based on understanding sort of the legacies of Afro-descendant cultures in Colombia. So we had it was very interesting because we did a lot of braiding in the hair. A lot of projects had to do with the hair, so hair turbans, hair braiding. Um, but also the same year, they were in Colombia. They had been murdering systematically social leaders, and many of them are Afro-descendant. So what we did was we took on a project that began with Isabel Gonzalez, whom you know. She had a project that the purpose was to embroider the names of these women and men who were being murdered in white handkerchiefs with red thread. So we just took on that project. And while we were doing reading sessions, and what we did was I selected women, Afro-descendant women who were writers here in Colombia. And if I could, I invited them to read them to themselves to read out loud while we were embroidering these names in the sewing group. Then the next year we did the project about what I just told you about the domesticity and the exploring the idea of the of the the construction of the feminine and the link to the idea of domesticity and the wife and the good wife and whatnot. And this year we submitted a project to the sort of the branch of the government that is in charge of research and science in Colombia. And it was a project, art-based project that what we wanted to do was research about how women and other diversities, sexual diversities, face or are challenged by the public space. And we wanted to create a piece, a textile piece that would sort of express whatever came out of those discussions and that research. And our idea was to actually invite the city through tapping through different organizations that deal with women rights and gay lesbian rights to conform a big sewing group that we would meet in a public space to do sewing and knitting publicly and to discuss what we were going to do. But given the challenges that arose with the COVID-19, then we haven't been able to meet. And we were thinking, or we are thinking, of including in this thinking of the public space, including, like I expressed earlier, what happens in the web, no? What happens
Mm,
in the web and what the challenges we face. Um, when we inhabit the web, is it as easy being a woman or an other in the web as it is for anybody else, or are there any challenges that come with wanting to navigate freely in the web? So every year, sort of, we have every year or every 2 years, or every time the project seems to come to an end, we sort of think about where that led us. Uh, Before, like we were talking about the house, so that the private space, now it's the public space. So I think that we end the project, we discuss what came out of it, and sort of we throw a different thread, and we thread along that way and see where that leads us. Also, the women that are sewing with me have been sort of constant since the beginning. We have additions, we have people who don't come back anymore, but we're basically the same group of 4 women. But the researchers who work with me have changed. So the first year, like I said, were the women who were in a master's degree and they all finished and they left. Then I had 3 researchers who were actually women who studied at university and graduated, and then they left. And now I have a different group of researchers. So we've shifted. It's changed a lot, and that also means that the interests change,
yeah.
in as much as there is movement in people who are thinking about this.
And so the next question is, what means do you use to achieve these goals? I think you're saying that you use partly researchers doing research on the topics and also the practical sewing sessions. I guess when
Yes.
you mentioned the ideas of going out to work with other organizations in the city, you haven't been able to do that because of the pandemic. So what means do you use now to achieve these goals?
Now, working remotely, or now in general?
Just generally, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what means do I use? Like I said, one of the bridges that I built in order to sort of like fill the gap between, or sew together academic research and sewing groups, is having events, like inviting a guest speaker, and trying to not have a conversation in academic language, but a conversation that flows between a language that people can understand, and asking about their research. So I try to do that so it's accessible to my mom and to anybody who's interested in listening to those or attending those conferences. Then I also have workshops. We also have workshops. It's not easy for somebody who has never thought about the house in terms of what it means to them, the house, or just inhabit the house, to suddenly start thinking about the house. So I invite artists and I invite people who have been thinking about these topics and to do workshops to sort of warm up the atmosphere. Um, we start doing small projects, small practice based. Some yeah, I wouldn't know if practice based is the word, but so small sewing projects. Um, and I think what has worked very well is is the fact that when you gather in a sewing group, what you're actually doing is you're actually talking. Very rarely would you go to a sewing group and you find that they're sewing in silence. So this possibility of discussion or talking or sharing, it's I think it's the key for us to be able to build something because it's
Yeah,
not just about the building. It's about the building collectively.
yeah,
And that shifts, that changes, and you have to allow for it to change. You have one idea, but that doesn't come out the way you expected it because you have people reinventing it. So yeah, allowing that space, I think it's very important.
and
Um,
what
yeah.
people or groups or organizations are affected by your project?
Um, it's open to the public. I mean, when we were okay, so we tried with different projects. We've tried to tap, to knock on doors depending on and institutions depending on their interests. Um, some have been receptive, some have been skeptic. Um, but I've been meaning to work very closely with an observatory for women's equity. But that they're basically a sister of ours in University of Isesi where I work. And they work very closely with other agencies that promote women's rights. I think this particular because the other projects were for the first project, it we were working with this project on memory, and they had sort of a relationship with many institutions that deal with memory, but it wasn't ours. It wasn't our network. This is the first project that is dealing with sort of the public space. So for this project, we have tried to get in touch with the mayor's office, with the secretary for women's rights in the mayor's office. But again, it's been very atypical year because of what's happening.
Mm,
So it's been very difficult to work with any offices. I think with the idea of working with the web, we might be able to find more um, establish more sisterhoods because people are used to working like that remotely
yeah.
than other agencies or other um, offices. Um,
And how do
but
you impact the people or groups that are affected by your project? So I guess this is like different for the different projects. For the first one, probably it was mostly through all those institutions of memory, but I guess for the current projects, it will mostly be the members of the public that are affected.
yes, I mean the
And
I
how do you impact them?
Yes, I have a class. I have a class that I teach every semester. Um, depends on if I have one group or two groups. It's 35 students, we have 70 students in which we discuss this. So there is an immediate like population of students who are affected by the topic, right? That's not the projects. Um, the projects are something completely different. But the population that is affected is those who participate. I mean, it's very hard for me to say how what incidents I have in the city of Cali. It's very hard for me to measure that, but I can tell you that the workshops that we offer and the meetings are open to the public. Are most of the all the workshops are free. I cannot hold them for infinite amount of people because people who do workshops have their demands like 10 people maximum, 20, 30, whatever, but we host them for free. We provide all the materials. Um, the sessions are open to whoever wants to come. They're not women exclusive. We've had men participate in these sewing sessions. We've had a lot of women, young women, who are doing social studies or social studies, no, social psychosocial therapy, and they
Mm.
come to the sewing group as a means to learning a bit more about those ways of relating to people. A lot of interest from those kind of women information. A lot of psychologists coming to talk
Like
about.
I think we would call that art therapists here.
Yes, exactly. A lot of art therapists coming over to understand the dynamics of the sewing group. So I think it affects those who are looking for other ways of relating to people. I don't think it didn't necessarily affect everybody because it still happens indoors and it still addresses a population that wants to be challenged, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
However, this project had the idea of precisely going outside of closed doors. It was bringing outside. It was doing a social an intervention of the public space to bring out these things that we've been talking in indoors for the last 4 years. Um, Talking about textiles, bringing textiles back into the museum, for example. That was something very important that we did um, during the pandemic. Pandemic or pandemia? Pandemic.
Pandemic.
We uh, set out a call for pieces that were knitted, embroidered, or sewn during COVID
Mhm.
times. And
Yeah.
people sent their pieces. And we managed to put together a virtual exhibit in the museum, which we're hopefully actually wanting to put together a how do you say, non-virtual presence, an actual exhibit, a physical exhibit in the museum. And what was very interesting is that we managed to bring to the museum pieces that normally wouldn't be in a museum. So
Mm.
quilts made for beds, not made for being exhibited, toys, knitted bags, embroidered uh, mantelpieces, and small little objects of decoration that embellish the houses, but rarely are in the museum. So I think, um, and this was very, very well received. We had pieces coming from Italy, from London, from Argentina, Mexico, Ecuador, from all places in
Love that.
Colombia, and
Yeah.
even worldwide.
I
And I
love that
think
project so much. So did they actually send the pieces or photos of the pieces?
they sent photos of the pieces,
Yeah.
but
That's a
for
beautiful
the
project.
exhibit we're holding in August, we're actually wanting to bring the pieces
Yeah,
from
exciting.
from
Everywhere.
yeah, from everywhere. So I think it impacts a community who is asking about what belongs in a museum. I think it impacts a community of knitters and embroiderers and makers. Uh, and I think it impacts overall the Kali community in the sense that, like I said, we offer a place to meet, to talk, to sew, and to create that it's open to the public. Even the virtual meetings we're hosting right now are open. Not all of them. Sometimes we have closed meetings because it's much more difficult to actually engage in conversations when you have in a virtual space because they have they cannot be one on one between a group. They have to be one on one. They have to be you know what I mean. I mean it's
Yeah.
difficult. You can't have a conversation with your neighbor. You need to have a conversation with everybody. And so it's very difficult to engage. But they're still open. So yeah.
And who are the most important groups or people with whom you work?
Mm,
It's
I
kind of
wouldn't know.
linked to the question, how do people and organizations help you achieve your aims?
Um, Let me try and answer that question. I mean, I think the most important group with whom I work and the people who I look after the most is those with whom I work, um, meaning those who come and make with us. Eh, I think about these women a lot, and I've grown very fond of them. They're very important for me. I wouldn't necessarily, yeah, we've had friendships, and I look after them. Um, and as I look after my students when I have classes, um, I try to build relationships with other institutions. Um, the museum, for example, has been an ally and is as has ownership of the project in the sense that they've always been very open to us. They opened the doors to us. They allowed the exhibit to happen. So they are a partner.
So another question was, how do people and organizations help you to achieve your aims? So I think you're saying that the museum helps you to achieve your aims.
The museum certainly helps us.
Which
The
museum?
university, the
Which
Museum
museum?
of Modern Art in
Ah,
Cali,
yes.
La Tertulia. The university helps us. The university where I work is, we don't have a faculty of arts, um, because there's no program in arts, but there's a department of arts which I run, um, and we give, basically how the university works is that all students have to take certain courses in liberal arts because we believe that going to an university education means that you're exposed to other knowledge, not necessarily whatever is in your curriculum of the subject or the program you're studying. That you should be exposed to topics that deal about ethics and humanities and whatnot. So they
Mhm.
have been very open for me working in this. It's not necessarily something that a university who doesn't have an arts program would necessarily allow. So I'm very grateful to them as well. But also, um, with the funding that we've brought to the project this year, I would say that there are other organizations who are allowing to fund these kind of projects. So and perhaps the more you expose yourself, in the sense that the more projects you are working in and getting together, the more chances are of getting more funding, more alliances are going to be made.
Mm.
So it's very exciting for us at this moment.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And how do you see the chain of events that lead towards achieving your objectives? I mean, I wrote these questions. I read them now, and I think in many ways the process is the objective. But anyway, this is the question. How do you see the chain of events that lead towards achieving your objectives?
Yeah, it's there are certainly objectives you trace or that we trace when we begin the projects, and you have to sort of achieve those objectives. But because most of the work that we do is collectively, organized or reorganized, it's they're constantly shifting. um so everything is dialogue based. um what we do, can you ask the question again, what we do to achieve those objectives?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you see the chain of events that lead towards achieving your objectives?
Hmm.
I think you covered it really well because you mentioned the different partners with the museum and with the help of the university. And I think it's difficult, I think, to visualize the chain of events that happens. For example, once you create the textile works, and for example, when you bring them together in the exhibition, it's hard to visualize that, but I guess that's really like, I guess the question is trying to trace the impact of the project as a whole, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Mm, it is. It's one thing that we actually know that we're not very good at is measuring impact, and we
Mm.
should be better at that. There's only an impact you can measure by how many people came to the museum, how many people went to visit the website, how many people came to see the exhibit. You know that you can measure an impact. Um, but it's very hard to tell to know what how you're impacting people on a more individual and personal basis. For example, there is certainly an a growing interest in textile practices. And
Absolutely.
I wonder if that's also because women like me who were doing it indoors are taking it to a different level,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
Um, so that's another impact you could measure. Or we're writing about it. You
Yeah.
know, we're writing about it. I by when I say that I don't want to publish articles, it's not because I'm diminishing the importance of the articles. It's because I'm questioning that being the only format the university uses. But of
Yeah.
course, writing articles about it is very important. You know, when I was starting to think about this as a subject of study, finding that there were women who were taking this seriously enough to write articles was very encouraging for me.
Mm.
So I think it's very important to write those articles. However, it's very important that we don't lose sight that these articles are one form of production and that
Yeah.
they should be valued over another. And I think universities are tending towards that precisely because it's more impact based. You know, they can measure the impacts. The Q1 article has so many citations, and that's it's just a very, you know, sad and lonely way to measure the impact of something.
Mm. And can you talk a bit? I realize that we're approaching the hour, so I don't know if you have another meeting, but my last
No.
question is, can you talk a bit about one of your works of art or exhibitions? And in the ideal world, if you had, I don't know if you could, if you had an image you could share on the screen, but if not, if you could just talk about one of your works of art or exhibitions.
Yes. Um, we were going to. I can share an image. Let me just look for it. Um, Let me look for it for a second. I can't do both at the same time. Okay.
Okay,
I can think and look at the same time. Sorry.
that's right.
Um, mm,
I'm so glad we did this. It's so lovely to hear about your projects. It's so inspiring and exciting.
how beautiful. Thank you. Um,
It would be great to bring your exhibition that you organized, that you're trying to bring as like a tangible exhibition in Colombia. It would be great to bring it here as well.
that would be lovely.
And
Yeah.
maybe like when you come over, we can you can maybe talk to people to see if we could sort something for that. So
I'm
exciting.
going. I'm going to open. I found the photograph, but let me just open several. Um, there's a lovelier photograph, but I don't have it here.
Are you able to share your screen?
Yes, just give me 1 second. I want
I have to open it
to
first, yeah.
to open it, but there's a nicer photograph that I took in the house in our house. But I think this one is nice because it has um, the hands of the women who are holding it. So The question again, um,
The
can you remind me
question
the
is,
question?
can you talk a bit about one of your works of art or oh yeah, I see it. I see the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the
So
beautiful one with all the names stitched on it?
yes, exactly.
Oh,
And the drawing in the middle was done by one of the women who work with me, who moved on. She's now living in Costa Rica, in Guatemala. She moved there because she was doing some studies with a grandmother who's has the tradition of healing and whatnot. And Maria Paola did design in the university, and then she went out traveling, and then she came back, and she joined as a professor in the university as a teacher, and she'd made this drawing for the project, and I think it was quite beautiful because it's women. If you can see the braid is done with mixing their hair,
oh yeah.
and the project is called Remendando Afectos, which is basically stitching emotions or stitching feelings. And I really like this piece because I think it really held us together. It really it really helped us find an identity together, as a group. Um, I am aware our names are there, our names are there, and they're beside the names of the women who have been part of our lives. And actually this piece, because in a different life I had in which I was considering subjects that were more serious or more worthy, I was doing another something I'm very passionate about, but I just don't have time to pursue both, is about sound.
Mm,
I was working on sound in public space and what is known as soundscape. Because I've always been very interested in sound. When I was doing film, this was what I was more interested in about, is the relationship between sound and image. Sound being the one that gives more information to the image. And we tend to think that's the other way around, that is the image that has what's important. And if you see The Shining, for example, the Kubrick movie, without sound, it's not
mm,
scary at all. It's
mm.
not scary at all. It's the sound that makes it scary. So this piece comes together with a recorded piece. I invited, because the we have a music program at ICESI, and the music program is, as many of the music programs around the world, is very much oriented. It's not oriented. It just happens to be attracts more male students.
Right.
There's a small group of women students, and particularly because this program is production based. There's a small group of women who are in the music program, and I invited them to come to our sessions to record some of our reading out loud, and to record some of the sounds of our conversations of the sisters and whatnot, and to create a piece. I didn't tell them how to put it together. I said, you are the musicians, you are the artists, that work with sound. You create a piece, and they did, and they used the sounds that came out of here, um, and they created their own piece. So I like the way, we, with through thread and cloth and needles, we stitched ourselves together, and I like the way that they, through sound, were able to piece together also something that is part of this project that is called stitching emotions. So I am very fond of this project in particular.
And do you ever
And
use
I'm
the two together as like an installation or?
Yeah,
are
well, it was supposed to be installed in the museum last year,
Yeah,
when the exhibit was supposed to be happening on March, but that couldn't happen. And then it was supposed to be happening this March,
yeah,
but that's not going to happen. So we're shooting for September this year. So
right.
hopefully it's going to be exhibited there. Yes, hopefully it's going to be exhibited there with the sound that accompanies them. Of course, the way the sound is accompanying the piece is changed, because before we were going to put it, a speaker, an invisible speaker in a room, and just people come in. No, we're going to put headphones. and
Right.
have an intimate sort of hearing session. But now, because of the fear of touching and proximity, we're thinking of having just a speaker in the room, which
Yeah.
is it changes for me. It changes the experience. It's not necessarily worse or better. It just changes the idea of the intimacy that you share with just listening to the sound closely in your ears, as opposed to it being, traveling through an open room. But yes, that was the idea, to have it exhibit in the museum.
Yeah. Although people might listen for longer, I think, if they don't have the headphones on. Can I just ask you to rotate? You've got a little rotate button on your
Yes.
images, just so because I don't think I'll be able to do that once I stop the recording. If you go
Yes.
along to the left, there's a little thing beside the heart that lets you do it, I think.
Okay. Let me
Oh,
find another photograph. I'll find another photograph for you. I have another photograph. Let me just I took some photographs in my house that are much nicer. Um, it might take me a little while to find them because they're on Google Photos, but I will find them. Give me a second. Sorry. There's the sound in your.
yeah, it
I
seems
don't
like.
I don't I don't mind it, but it might affect the recording.
Oh, yeah, it seems like there's some digger or something started outside.
Ah,
Like
okay, okay, but
that's
it's
actually
not from your
in the
microphone.
street. No.
Okay, hold on, I have it here. It's in April. I had to find the 2020, right? Was the year we were confined.
Yeah. Well, we're still confined here.
Yes, I know,
We've got
but
like
yeah,
they're complaining that this is like the eternal lockdown because we don't even have an end in sight of when we can go back to shops and things. But for me, it's not so bad because nursery children are allowed to go to nursery, like, but school children are at home. So for people with school children, I think it's difficult.
yes, I know. It's the same. It's the same for us here. Although my kids are going now. The oldest one, like she had a surgery to do, and we thought it was the
Oh,
best
remember
time
that
for her
we're
to do it.
recording.
Yes, yes, yes. I don't mind. Actually, that's one of the things that I like about having the space is that I think motherhood is something that has driven me to these subjects, and I think talking about motherhood, and I think motherhood is very difficult. It's very hard, and we rarely talk about motherhood. We rarely share with other people how hard it is to be a mother, and I think that these spaces have allowed me to to talk about these things that are
Yeah,
very important to women and affect us: menopause, menstruation, motherhood, all with M's. um, and we don't necessarily, but they're part of who we are.
yeah,
And we're scholars, but we're mothers, and sometimes we're mothers before being scholars. And I think that COVID-19 has reminded us very violently about that,
yeah.
about who we want to be, but in reality who we are. And so yes, I am aware that we're recording, but I don't mind because I no longer want to have that I mean, I understand the privacy things about talking about our daughters and whatnot. So yeah, but I don't mind, because I think that it's something that
Also
I've come
important.
to terms with. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not finding the photograph, but I will.
Ah, no worry. That's okay. We can stop. You can show it to me another time.
No, but
Uh,
it would be nice for you to have it here if you're going to use it.
it would be
Or I
nice to
can send
see
it
it.
to you. We can talk about it. I particularly like this one because I took it in our house, and I took it in the house because I didn't have any decent photographs of it. So
Yeah.
it's one with a nice light and
I think the
it's, you
third
know,
thing that I
it's
would probably include in my writing is I'm going to write something about arpilleras and mail art, and so I probably would write first. I think about your project calling for pieces during the pandemic that sort of photos came from all over the world as a kind of mail art. So I think I would integrate that with the other projects that I'm writing about that have these sort of international exchanges. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But yeah, it would be really lovely to see it because I love the way you trace the female genealogy in that embroidery. So beautiful.
yeah. And the female genealogy, that's not necessarily exclusively to your own, you know, that includes so many women, so many
Yeah,
different women.
exactly. Yeah, in different ways. And even like, even though nobody that I know, or none of the names of the people that I, well, apart from you, obviously, are on that embroidery. Somehow, like, I still feel like it really moves me, that idea of people embroidering the names of, like, the women who've been close to them or nurtured them or inspired them. It's really quite a moving piece.
Yeah, I think so too. Um, oh, jeepers. I've got so much things in my Google Photos. I really should just delete half of it. But then when you delete them, then you want to find them and then you just can't find them. I'm gonna just go to, hold on. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. This is a GIF that I'm gonna share with you. Hold on. Where is the share?
It's beside the leave button.
Yeah. Okay. Do you see it?
Oh, yeah. It's
But
beautiful. And you have it outside as well. That's so nice.
yeah. Okay. This is here.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And then
And
it
then you can,
it went
sorry?
to something else. Or maybe that was just your screen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's my screen
just your
and then
screen.
it's going back to the photograph.
Yeah.
Do you see it
Beautiful.
now?
Yeah, yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it too. I like it
Have
too.
they
I have,
affect? Oh, does that also mean affect in Spanish?
yes, but I think I did, this is a word that I have to come to terms with because I don't necessarily think that affect is the same thing as is affect the same thing as affection? I feel affection towards you.
I think it's probably derived from the same root, but I think it's more to do with the haptic sort of how you're moved by pieces, which is different from affection, which is something that someone does to someone else, if you see what I mean.
Yes, exactly. So
So it's
it's
more
more
about the
complex.
experience, I
Yeah,
think.
it's more exactly. So here it was not necessarily the concept of affect. It was more the intimacy of the affection, of how how you sort of you mend those ties that might or might not have been affected. You know, how to mend things, how to mend those that genealogy of women's in your lives, how to come to terms with this legacy. Um, so, but actually, affect is a word that I'm very interested
Yeah,
in
and
both
also
Spanish and
the
English.
idea of like affect, as in like the other sense of sort of um changing people, or
Exactly.
so
Hmm.
that's really exciting as well. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think I better finish here. I'm
Okay.
only allowed to do an
I
hour for
yeah.
these
No, sorry,
interviews.
but I realized, and this is something I always make a mistake, that I've talked about the projects that I do collectively, but I also have individual projects that are very exciting for me.
Oh yeah, I'd love to.
I
Maybe
have,
another day we could have another interview and just focus on those as well.
if you want, if you're interested in them, I could send you the link
Definitely.
of those projects as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd really love to know about them. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording now.
Okay.
And